The dean called my name, and the applause was deafening, but all I could hear was the silence from the 2 empty seats in the front row. I did not panic. I checked my phone, expecting a tragedy. Instead, I found a text from my mother, sent 2 minutes ago. Quick! What is the dog sitter's code? Signal is bad on the cruise deck. They were not in a hospital. They were on a luxury yacht, celebrating my brother's imaginary business launch, missing my law school graduation to ask me for a favor. Before I tell you exactly how much that text message cost them, drop a comment. Watching from your city and time check. I want to see where my cycle breakers are tuning in from. I did not cry on the drive home. Crying implies surprise, and I was not surprised. I was just done. I pulled into the lot of my building, a squat brick structure on the edge of the city that looked more like a bunker than a home. Most 26-year-old law school graduates celebrate their big day with champagne brunches or rooftop parties. I celebrated by engaging the 3rd deadbolt on my front door. I call my apartment the Fortress. It is a ground floor unit, which usually makes people nervous, but I chose it for the structural integrity. I installed the steel reinforcement bars on the windows myself. I set up the motion sensor cameras that cover every inch of the entryway. My friends think I am paranoid, that I watch too many true crime documentaries. They do not understand that when you grow up in a house where privacy is treated like an insult and boundaries are treated like a declaration of war, you do not crave luxury. You crave security. You crave a door that only opens when you say so. I tossed my cap and gown onto the sofa. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was mine. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another text from my mother, probably asking if I had found the code yet, or maybe complaining that the reception on the yacht was spotty. I did not look. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I simply placed it face down on the kitchen counter. Like a weapon I was choosing not to fire yet. I walked over to my desk. It is a simple setup, just a laptop and a stack of legal pads, but it is where I have spent the last 3 years dismantling the person they trained me to be. I sat down and opened my computer. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I did not go to social media. I did not look at photos of my classmates celebrating with their proud parents. I opened a specific file that I have been building since I was 22. It was a spreadsheet titled Family Trust. The cursor blinked, waiting for input. This was not a diary. It was not a manifesto. It was a ledger. Columns and rows of dates, amounts, and promises. Every time they borrowed money for a crisis that turned out to be a vacation. Every time they promised to pay me back as soon as a deal closed. Every time they guilted me into covering a bill because we are a family, Haley. And family helps each other. I looked at the total at the bottom of the screen. $120,000. That was not just money. That was my freedom. That was the inheritance my grandmother left me. Specifically so I could buy a house. Specifically so I would not be trapped like she was. And piece by piece, lie by lie, they had siphoned it away. I scrolled through the entries. $1,000 for a car repair that never happened. $5,000 for Logan's tech startup that did not exist. $10,000 for medical bills that turned out to be a down payment on a timeshare. I sat there in the blue light of the monitor. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a daughter trying to earn her place. I felt like an auditor conducting a forensic investigation. They thought I was the quiet, dutiful girl who kept the peace. They forgot that I just spent 3 years learning how to build a case. And today, they gave me the final piece of evidence I needed to close it. I stared at the glowing rows of the spreadsheet, and the numbers seemed to blur into a timeline of my own stupidity. $120,000. To anyone else, that looks like a down payment on a dream home or a safety net for a lifetime. To me, it looked like a crime scene. That money did not come from my job. I worked 3 shifts at the law library, just to cover my rent and tuition because I refused to touch the principal. That money was the inheritance my grandmother left me when I turned 21. She whispered it to me on her deathbed, gripping my hand with surprising strength. She told me to keep it secret, to keep it safe, because she knew exactly who her son was. She knew my father viewed money not as a resource, but as his birthright. And I had failed her. I had let them bleed it dry, transaction by transaction. I remember the night of the biggest withdrawal. It was 2 years ago. I was sitting on the floor of my drafty studio apartment, wearing 3 layers of sweaters because I was too scared to turn on the heat. I was eating instant noodles for the 5th night in a row. My phone rang. And it was my dad. He was not asking how I was. He was frantic. He told me Logan was in trouble, deep trouble. Something about investors and a misunderstanding that could turn legal if they did not have $20,000 by morning. I transferred the money. I sat there, shivering in the cold, eating sodium-packed broth. And I wired $20,000 to save my brother from a consequence he earned. I told myself I was being a good sister. I told myself that if I saved them, they would finally love me. I thought I was buying safety. I did not realize I was just paying rent for a space in their hearts that did not even exist. Looking at the ledger now, the pattern was undeniable. It was not bad luck. It was not a series of unfortunate events. It was a formula. I call it the vampire's mathematics. In a toxic family system, competence is punished, and incompetence is rewarded. It is a twisted economic model, where the child who is strong, who is stable, who figures things out on her own, is viewed as a resource to be harvested. Because I did not need help, they assumed I did not deserve anything. Because I was capable of surviving on my own, they felt entitled to take what I had to keep the ship afloat. Meanwhile, Logan was the eternal victim. His failures were never his fault. They were bad timing, bad partners, bad luck. And because he was weak, because he refused to grow up, he became the priority. They poured resources into him, like water into a cracked vase, terrified that if they stopped, he would shatter. They were not protecting him. They were addicted to saving him, and I was the bankroll for their addiction. I traced my finger over the screen, over the date of the graduation I just missed. They were not just on a cruise. They were on a vacation paid for by the emergency loan I gave them last Christmas for a boiler repair that never happened. They were drinking champagne purchased with my grandmother's legacy, celebrating the brother who had never finished anything in his life, while ignoring the daughter who just graduated top of her class. The realization settled over me, cold and heavy as a stone. I had not been a daughter to them for a long time. I was an insurance policy. I was a hedge fund. I was the safety net they used so they could walk tightropes without fear. But safety nets eventually snap. And as I looked at that final sum, I realized something else. I was not just done being their banker. I was done being their victim. I closed the laptop with a snap that echoed in the empty room like a gunshot. The audit was over. It was time for collections. 1 week later, the silence broke. Not with an apology, but with an assault. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, vibrating so hard it rattled against the granite. It was a text from my mother. I did not want to look, but old habits die hard. Why didn't you answer about the dog code? The sitter couldn't get in. The carpet is ruined. You owe us for the cleaning. I stared at the screen, blinking. They had missed my graduation. They had been gone for 7 days. And their first communication was not congratulations, or we're sorry. It was an invoice for a mess they created. Before I could even process the audacity, another notification popped up. Instagram. It was Logan. He had posted a photo of himself on the deck of the yacht, tanned and smiling, wearing a gold watch that looked suspiciously familiar. I zoomed in. It was the vintage Omega I had bought my father for his 50th birthday, the one I had saved for 6 months to afford. Logan was wearing it like a trophy. The caption read, "Self-made success. The grind never stops." I felt the blood rush to my face, hot and sharp. Self-made. The only thing Logan had ever made himself was a sandwich, and even then, someone else probably bought the bread. He was wearing my hard work on his wrist while claiming to be a titan of industry, all funded by the sister he could not be bothered to text back. Then came the group message. Family dinner, Sunday at 6 in the evening. Haley, you need to come and apologize for being difficult about the dog sitter. We need to clear the air. Apologize. They wanted me to apologize. For graduating. For not being their 24-hour concierge service while they partied on my dime. For existing outside of their immediate needs. The phone buzzed again, and again, a relentless, angry insect, demanding attention. It felt like a physical assault. A poke in the chest. A finger in the face. Each vibration was a reminder that to them, I was not a person with feelings or achievements. I was an appliance that had malfunctioned. I looked at the phone, buzzing on the counter. In the past, I would have answered. I would have explained, defended, begged them to understand. I would have shown up at that dinner with a store-bought cake and a tightly wound smile, trying to smooth things over, trying to earn my way back into their good graces. But not today. The audit was finished. The evidence was undeniable. They were not just thoughtless. They were unredeemable. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to turn it off. The screen went black, and the buzzing stopped. The silence returned to my fortress, heavy and absolute. But this time, it was not lonely. It was strategic. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to engage, to fight, to play the game I had always lost. I was not going to play. I was going to change the rules. I walked back to my laptop, the blue light waiting for me in the dark. I did not need to scream. I did not need to cry. I needed a printer, and I needed a courier. Sunday dinner was going to have a special guest, and it was not going to be me. Sunday, 6 in the evening. The time my mother had set for my tribunal. In a parallel universe. Or maybe just my old life. I would be walking up their driveway right now, clutching a store-bought apology cake, my stomach in knots, preparing to beg for forgiveness for a crime I did not commit. I would be rehearsing my defense, knowing they would not listen. I would be walking into the lion's den with a stake tied around my neck. But in this life, I was sitting on my couch in the fortress, eating takeout sushi and watching the delivery tracker on my laptop screen. The little icon moved steadily down the map, approaching my parents' house. I did not go to dinner. I sent a proxy. I had spent Saturday night assembling the package. It was not a tear-stained letter. It was not a box of sentimental memories hoping to spark nostalgia. It was a binder. A thick, black 3-ring binder with a label on the spine that read, Account Reconciliation, 2020 to 2024. Inside, I had compiled the invoice. It was a thing of terrifying beauty. I itemized every single transaction from the last 4 years. The emergency rent for Logan, the car repairs, the medical bills, the vacations. I included dates, amounts, and most importantly, the receipts. Next to every line item, I had attached a screenshot of a text message or an email from them explicitly promising repayment. Can you spot me $5,000 for the crypto thing? I swear I'll pay you back double next month. Logan, February 2022. We just need this for the boiler, honey. We'll wire it back as soon as the tax return hits. Dad, November 2023. I converted their vague emotional manipulation into hard, cold debt. Legally, a promise to repay turns a gift into a loan. I was not a daughter giving charity anymore. I was a creditor calling in a note. The grand total, highlighted in bold red ink at the bottom of page 1, was $124,300.50. At 6:15 in the evening, my laptop pinged. Package delivered. Signed for by B. Cameron. I closed my eyes and let myself visualize the scene. I knew their script so well I could direct it. They would be sitting at the dining table, the good china set out, the wine breathing. They would be checking the clock, tapping their feet, annoyed that I was late, ready to launch into their lecture about respect and punctuality. When the doorbell rang, my father would have stood up, smoothing his shirt, putting on his stern patriarch face, expecting to see me cowering on the porch. Instead, he found a courier with a clipboard. I imagined the confusion as he took the box, the weight of it. He probably thought it was a gift, a peace offering. I imagine him carrying it back to the table, my mother and Logan watching expectantly. See? She folded. She always folds. He would cut the tape, he would open the lid, and instead of an apology cake, he would find the invoice. I imagine the silence that followed. The rustle of paper as he turned the pages. The realization dawning on Logan's face when he saw his own texts printed out in high definition. The shock radiating off my mother as she saw the total sum, the price of the cruise, the price of the neglect, the price of my silence written out in black and white. On top of the binder, I had left a single index card. I kept the message brief. It was not emotional. It was transactional. You asked me to apologize for my absence. This is the price of my absence. Do not contact me. Do not text me. And do not come to my home until your balance is 0. I stared at my phone, waiting for the explosion. Usually, the reaction time was immediate. Scream, threaten, guilt. But minute after minute ticked by. 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock. The phone remained black. The silence was louder than any screaming match we had ever had. For the first time in 26 years, I had rendered them speechless. They were not calling because they could not gaslight a spreadsheet. The numbers did not care about their feelings. The audit was undeniable. 2 nights later, the motion sensor on my front porch chimed. It was not the aggressive, rapid-fire ping of a delivery driver, or the loitering signal of a solicitor. It was a single, hesitant tone. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. It was my father, but not the father I expected. I expected the red-faced tyrant who had texted me demands for an apology. I expected the man who screamed about respect while stealing my savings. Instead, the man on my screen looked like he had aged a decade in 48 hours. His shoulders were slumped, his usually pristine polo shirt was wrinkled, and he was holding the black binder against his chest like a shield. He did not ring the doorbell. He just stood there, staring at the steel-reinforced door, looking lost. I watched him for a full minute. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitorous, rhythmic thud that sounded suspiciously like hope. Maybe he read it. A small voice whispered. Maybe the numbers finally broke through the narcissism. I unlocked the first deadbolt. Then the second. I opened the door, but I kept the security gate locked. A grid of black iron between us. Haley, he breathed. His voice was cracked. Raw. He looked up, and I saw his eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them purple with exhaustion. I read it. All of it. I did not speak. I just gripped the cold metal of the gate. I didn't realize, he said. And then his face crumbled. It was not a graceful single tear. It was an ugly, heaving sob. He leaned his forehead against the iron bars. God, Haley. $120,000. I destroyed you. I treated you like a bank account. And I let Logan. He choked on my brother's name. I let him take everything. I'm so sorry, Princess. I failed you. He called me Princess. He hadn't used that word since I was 6. For a moment, the bars between us felt unbearable. He looked small, broken, and my anger dissolved into the familiar ache of a daughter who just wanted her father back. This was the moment I'd waited for, the apology. The awakening. Dad, I whispered, reaching for the gate key. Hope filled his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, he said shakily. But Logan's in trouble. The guilt is eating him alive. If we could just start fresh, erase the debt, be a family again. The key clicked in the lock. Then ping. Not my phone. The old iPad on the console lit up. From Logan draft. Subject. Did you cry yet? Preview. Make sure she signs the waiver tonight. The bookie's outside. Cry if you have to. My hand froze. The man in front of me wasn't grieving, he was performing. The tears weren't for me. They were for Logan's debt. Haley? He asked softly. Can we fix this? I pulled the key out. Click. Yes, I said calmly. We can. I opened the gate. He stepped inside, relieved, believing he'd won. I handed him a document. A debt cancellation agreement. $124,000. Once you sign, it's gone. He didn't read it. He signed immediately. Go home, I said. Tell Logan he can sleep tonight. He left lighter than he arrived. I locked the door and called my CPA. He signed. I said. File the 1099-C. You're sure? She asked. It triggers an audit. I'm sure. April came. On April 14th. My father called screaming. They say we owe $42,000 in taxes. Accounts frozen. I forgave the debt, I said evenly, and reported it. Cancelled debt is taxable income. Silence. You spent it, I continued. So the government taxed it. You planned this, he hissed. I planned for consequences, I said. Forgiveness isn't free. It's a transfer of liability. I hung up. The ledger was closed. The balance was 0. I didn't get my money back, but I got something better. Justice.